next persons against non-state torture, Ms. MacDonald and Ms. Sarson. I presume you're going to divide your time. I'll leave that up to you, but the next 5 minutes is all yours. Welcome.
Thank you. My mic on yet? Yes. Okay. I'm Linda MacDonald, and this is Jeanne Sarson, and we are Persons Against Non-State Torture and are members of the National Council of Women of Canada. We are retired public health nurses, grassroots feminist activists, and for 31 years have supported women in Canada who have been subjected to torture by non-state actors or non-state torture, starting with one woman in our community from Nova Scotia. We proudly bring these women's voices, many having endured non-state torture from infancy onward, and they all have endured grave discrimination. Non-state torture is torture that occurs in the domestic or private sphere, in relationships perpetrated within families, in human trafficking, in prostitution, in pornographic exploitation, in violent groups and gangs, dismissed as social, cultural, traditional, or religious acts or norms, and can be committed through migration, displacement, and humanitarian unrest. Non-state actors defined by the UN Security Council are any individual or entity not acting under the lawful authority of the state. Acts of non-state torture are intentional and can include mental or physical severe pain and suffering with electric shocking, water torture, forced drugging, group or gang raping, beatings, whippings, cutting, burning, forced impregnation, and abortions. Because Canada's criminal code lacks a law against non-state torture, the women are invisibilized, pathologized, and mislabeled mentally ill. Their normal responses to non-state torture are seen as a disorder, and discrimination prevents them from receiving the proper mental health care they need to heal with dignity from such serious crimes and human rights violations. A simple example is Sarah, a survivor of non-state torture getting blood work at our local hospital. Seeing blood tubes in the elevator, she got triggered and fell to the floor. The hospital staff misunderstood her response, placed her on a stretcher with raised side rails, and watched by a uniformed commissioner stopped her from escaping. After 8 hours, she called us in the hospital, and we helped settle her. If the staff had understood this is a normal response to the torture terror of seeing her own blood, this 8-hour ordeal could have been prevented. Using our own victimization-traumatization-informed model of care, we have been successful in helping women heal from non-state torture.
I will continue, and I will offer evidence-based and victim-centered research. We are not alone in identifying and understanding the mental health differences between non-state torture and assault or abuse victimizations. Our research questionnaire asked citizens whether 48 violent behaviors were indicative of assault, abuse, or non-state torture, if many or all were inflicted on one person. Of 776 respondents, 723, 93% were Canadian. 680, 88% were female respondents, 89, 12% were male, 7 unanswered or said other. 7% were from other countries, 8% came via our website or regular mail. This questionnaire also asked if you were forced to choose between being a victim of abuse, assault, or non-state torture, which would you choose? 680, 88% chose assault or abuse, explaining non-state torture was more life-threatening, more dehumanizing, more painful, more difficult to heal from, and being disbelieved. 6% were undecided or did not answer. 6% chose non-state torture. As 2 women explained, that's all they knew. One woman said, I was brought into a child sex trafficking ring by my father when I was around the age of 4. Most of what I was put through in this ring I consider to be torture. I am still having powerful flashbacks, which include body memories to this torture. And the other woman said, I was definitely tortured. I use this term to help healthcare professionals and others understand my childhood and not minimize it. Our 3 recommendations are to criminalize torture perpetrated by non-state actors as a torture crime, to recognize non-state torture, victimization, traumatization, informed care, and education on violence against women must include non-state torture victimization. Women cannot mentally heal when social political injustice dehumanizes them as persons with no legal right to truth tell, not treated with dignity, disbelieved, and not protected from non-state tortures. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're now going to begin with rounds of questions, starting with the Conservatives. Ms. Roberts, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I commend you. Your work is so important, and I applaud you. So I'm going to start with Linda and Jeanne. And I have to tell you, if you haven't read their book, don't read it at night before you go to bed. So I'm going to quote a few things because I want to get to the torture part, because I think women, this non-state and state torture is not fair. So I'm going to start by a quote on page 15 of your book from Sarah. No hope for people like me. Page 27 quote from Sarah. Father was using her for his friends, and her aunt was making her sleep with her son and making them do things while she watched. And that dogs were used. Page 33 quote, in 2020, in 1993, the world did not acknowledge such dehumanization brutally as non-state torture as a form of violence being inflicted on girls and women within family relationships. Sarah feared she would self-harm herself if she could not get out. And she kept repeating, get out, get out, get out, which meant all crimes perpetrated against her. She said, I know they didn't want me to die because I was their commodity. I could go on and on. There's many, many quotes that really touched me when I read through a lot of the information in her book, in your book. And one of the things that really shocked me was when she said, big people, adults, ministers, government workers, cops, pilots, basement orgies are like other people having parties or Tupperware, etc., and being taken way back in woods and tortured and raped continuously. So my question to you is, the study we're conducting today on women's mental health. So let me ask you this. If a woman has suffered horrible atrocities from the hands of a family member, a spouse, or stranger, and the Canadian legal system does not acknowledge that she has been put through is torture, what would that do to women's mental health? For example, gang rape has been acknowledged by the United Nations as torture, but the Canadian Criminal Code does not. So what happens to the women's mental health who has finally had the courage to step up and name her torturer and have the legal system say, no, you didn't experience torture? I'll leave it to one of Linda or Jeanne to answer, please.
What happens to them? Well, Linda and I in 1993, when Sarah came to us, we had no idea that in families torture happened. So what we learned is that they survived by disassociation. Sarah did not know she was a human being. She did not know. When we said to her, Sarah, you're a human being, she said, nobody ever told me that. She thought she was an IT. That's how she explained herself as a human being. I was an it. And some women, and Sarah included, often when she was trying to heal, she would want to hold her hand because she said she could not feel any sensation. Because in order to survive, they have to cut off their senses. They cut off their smell, they cut off their physical sense, they cut off their visual sense. I was sitting outdoors with Sarah one day, in the fall, and all of a sudden she said, look at the trees. They're turning color. She said that she had only seen in black and white. And we see that over and over again. And when you reference the issue to get out, it was the fact that the torture memories were so heavy, and if they're not listened to, they don't know what else to do. So as other people have said here, they start cutting, they're self-drugging, they have difficulty with the food they eat, and they also go into, for Sarah, she was also taught by her parents to, if you will, die by suicide. When she was a little girl, they used to put her, this is her telling, in the hallway and teach her how to cut her wrists if she ever told. So when we met her, she was almost 30 years old. She was a professional, she had a professional job, and she was still living two lives. And people seem to not understand that. Yet we know that in domestic violence, women go to work, they go home and get beaten. She was a professional, she went to work, she went home, even almost at 30, was still being tortured, was still being trafficked, and still did not understand that what she was living was violence. And what we have to understand, it takes time for them to understand what they've been going through, because survival, she was a baby and the torture started then.
So I just want to say one thing, because I know I don't have a lot of time. So there was a quote on page 43. I have lived my life doing what others wanted me to do with the hope they might love me or come to care for me even a little. So I want to thank you, Jeanne and Linda, for saving her, because reading this book has taught me a lot. And I think that the non-state torture and torture, it's very similar. How can a country like Canada not look at this as torture? This woman that you were able to save today, that was torture. So go ahead, Linda,
Yeah.
sorry.
And what I wanted to do is explain how Sarah and all the women feel, because there's no law in our country.
Right.
It's one thing to be dehumanized by your family or traffickers or in prostitution or in pornography, but it's another to be dehumanized by your country, because they are told by their country that Sarah endured 20,000 rapes by the age of 20. So if we want to call that assault in our country, that is an injustice, a grave injustice to her. It reinforces that she's an it and that nobody will ever believe her. And, you know, how do we say that women in conflict that are gang raped, they were tortured, but yet in our own country, Sarah, who was gang raped, or women after a hockey game were gang raped? How do we say to them that it's assault, it's not torture? So that's the injustice that we're telling them, that they're not as important, and it's a form of discrimination that they live with every day.